story of a rise from what's been described as modest circumstances to a position as representative of your country in a number of important positions and leadership of your party and other important jobs. What we like to do is start at the beginning, if we may. You were born in Lockhart, Texas in October of 1918.
That's correct.
What kind of town is or was Lockhart, and how did your family come to be there?
Well, my mother's parents, my grandfather and grandmother, my grandfather was one of a number of brothers who came to Texas shortly after the Civil War and around that time.
From where?
And they came from Germany. They were very old. They were a typical German family then that came here with a few dollars, I suspect, and they came to Galveston.
Do you know what brought them to Galveston in particular?
Well, they really went to Hempstead first. I mean, after that, they came to Galveston because a great many of the German Jews who came to Galveston. They had relatives or friends, and they wanted to come to the Southwest and get away from the crowds that they saw then. New York was, of course, to them a teeming city, so I've been told, and they wanted to go to a land of opportunity. So the Schwartz family, it was not with a T, it was Schwarz, originally went to Hempstead. And I think my grandfather's, I think a great uncle of mine was the first, I'm almost certain, was the first Reform rabbi in Texas. And
that was at Hempstead?
And he came to Hempstead, into that area, that general area. And after they had been there some time, my mother's parents struck out on their own, as went on to Lockhart. They left some of the relatives and they moved to Lockhart, Texas.
How far is that from?
Lockhart, Texas, must have been 150 miles further inland. So Galveston, and one of the first stops was Hempstead. And there in Hempstead, some of my great uncle and his had my grandfather's brother had a little store, and he had a little store and dry goods store and a little funeral parlor and a little of everything else, and that was B. Schwartz and Sons, and then B. Schwartz and Family, I think they call the store, or maybe and Son. And my grandfather he moved then to Lockhart, Texas, and he became his name was Leo, and it became L. Schwartz and Company was the store there. So my grandfather and grandmother lived in Lockhart. It was a sleepy little southern town of about 3,500 people, and it depended upon cotton for its main. It was the cash crop of the town, and they had a little store around the square, and they prospered a bit there. My mother, as my mother grew into became a young woman, my father then came here from Germany some years later, and he met my mother, and he traveled through that part of the country. He was a piano salesman. He was a musician, but a musician couldn't make a living as a musician if he wasn't uniquely good. So my dad started out as a piano salesman. He met my mother in Lockhart, and they were married, and they too wanted to strike on their own. My father wanted to be independent, and so did my mother, her family, and my grandfather let my father have a few $1,000s, or a little credit, and they went to Hamlin, Texas. They moved another couple of 100 miles west now.
Let me back up just a little bit.
All right.
Do you know where in Germany your mother's family came from?
No, I don't. I really don't.
Or your father's?
No, I think my father's Bavaria. And I don't know where my mother's family was from. I could probably get that for you, and I'll try to do it.
All right. How did they meet?
My dad happened to be traveling through that part of the country, and someone introduced him to my mother in Lockhart, and they were married, and after not a long courtship, my mother had sort of helped her father run the business. She was sort of a businesswoman. And she was not a young woman when they married. She was about 30, I think, which was, I guess, not which was getting to be along in years in those days. But she always told me that she was not young, and my dad was not young. He'd been a bachelor for some time, and they fell in love and had a happy marriage for a long time.
You mentioned that your grandfather, I think it was one of the first Reformed rabbis.
He's one of his brothers.
Ah.
Yes, one of his brothers, who was a great uncle of mine that would have been there.
And did he have a pulpit there?
And there was no such really thing as a pulpit, but what we'd have is the Jewish families for miles around, and all the little towns would gather on sometimes on Friday nights, normally not, but on the holidays. And I'm sure maybe he made his living another way.
Mm-hmm.
Another member of the family, about that same time, named Suhler, S-U-L-E-R, S-U-H-L-E-R, who came from that same family. He was the first Reform rabbi in Dallas, Texas, which of course is quite a city.
And he had a pulpit there.
He had, yes, he had a serious congregation.
What congregation was that?
I don't even know what it was called then. We get back. It's sad that I don't know, because I had an interest in this many years ago when I first came to Dallas, and shortly after Helen and I were married in the mid-40s. I went back and did a history of the Jews in Texas.
Mm-hmm.
And I spent about a month or two working on that project, several months researching it. And I'll be damned if I didn't. It was all written out. I didn't type it. I wrote it out, and I spoke to the Temple Sisterhood, damn it, and gave that, and it was interesting. I was fascinated with it. And a couple of years later, when I started looking at those papers, they were gone. And I never know what happened to them. I've never duplicated the work. The whole file had disappeared with it, a great deal of research.
And you don't know whether the sisterhood still has it or not?
I'm sure they don't. I gave a little oral statement there to 30, 40. The ladies had nothing else to do, and neither did I. I wouldn't be doing it if they would have been listening. I was a young lawyer trying to establish myself as being a scholar in the community, and that was a good way of doing it. And I was interested.
So your early years, for the most part, were spent in Hamlin?
Hamlin.
Hamlin.
It was a small little town of about 2,000 people. And I guess until I was about the third or fourth grade. The fourth grade I completed there. And when I was going in to enter the fifth grade, my parents moved to Stamford, which was 30 miles or 15 miles away. Stamford was a town twice as large. It was about 4,000. And my mother's sister lived there, and they wanted to be together, and the town seemed to be prospering a little more than Hamlin. So we moved there and had a little store there.
These moves were always in pursuit of better business?
Always pursuit of a living. They were trying to make a living, and my father was then having some financial troubles. He'd done a rather unique thing. My mother made him, but the year before we moved there, my mother thought that we ought to all go to Europe. She thought that she wanted to go with her father and mother, and wanted to take me. I was a kid of about, I guess in the second or third grade, so I was 10 years old when I went, and my brother was 3. So my dad said we couldn't leave the store, and she said, well, just close the damn store. And they put a lock on the business and went off for 3 months to Europe.
Why was she anxious to go back to Europe at that point?
First she wanted to accompany her parents, and second she wanted to revisit the place where her parents were born, and she wanted me, a 10-year-old, to begin to have a feel of those things. And there were 2 things that required: 1, dragging along the 3-year-old, and 2, closing the store. So Brother Ted went, and the store closed, and my father never recovered from that. 29 crash came that year, and so he was dead broke again, couldn't pay his bills. He was looking and thought maybe do a little more business in Stamford. And he kept his store over there as we were growing up, and we made, at best, a living. It was a very difficult time, and he never accumulated anything. And
do you recall much about that trip as a 10-year-old?
Well, I do recall some of it, yes. I recall that we went on a boat. I recall that we didn't go first class, we went second class. And I recall seeing some of the relatives over there, and some of them had very fashionable, fine homes. One of them, I remember, was editor of one of the papers in Zurich. My recollection is it was a Jewish paper that was published there, and I can remember in the Yiddish or something or other, and as I recall. But the recollections are rather vague now. When I first came back, and as a young man, I recall things better.
How long a trip was it?
About a 3-month trip.
When you came back and your father was struggling, this was just after the great Wall Street crash.
Yeah.
Things must have been very rough for you.
Yeah, things were difficult with my family, and they had a hard time keeping the store open and getting a few dollars out of it. It was really a very small little business, and everyone was broke, so we didn't really know we were poor because everyone was so poor. No one had anything to do, and there's nothing to spend money on anyway. And farmers brought in a few chickens and eggs and traded them for a pair of shoes, and I still recall Sunday morning, we were going to have fried chicken. I always had plenty of food in the house, but I'd go out and wring the chicken's neck, and if it was turkey, I'd chop it off with the axe because it was too big for me, and I can remember just as vividly.
But you didn't lack, although you were poor, you didn't
Never
lack for the
lacked.
essentials.
No, we always had more than the essentials. My parents always saw that we had more than we needed. But we were poor. We couldn't afford to do things. There weren't vacations. There weren't the things that you saw some of other people doing, but not in that town, because everyone in that town was broke, so it didn't make any difference.
How did you manage to pay for the trip to Europe then?
Well, as my dad had gone before, and when he came back was the crash, you see.
Ah, yes.
So he left, and he had a few $1,000s to his name. It was good, and hell, things were good. He didn't care if he had a few $1,000, close the damn store and pick up where he left off. By the time he really came back and things going on, the crash was either just before or just after. I think shortly after that. What I figured is I was born in 18, I was about 10, so I went 28, 29 comes a crash. So my dad used to raise hell about it. My mother used to say when they'd argue, they'd say, well, if they hadn't closed that store, they wouldn't have that trip, and they wouldn't have taken that damn trip that she wanted to go, he wouldn't be broke. She was a much wiser person than he was, and she used to say, Carl, the only thing we have left is the trip, and they can never take that away from us.
Did she feel that way afterwards, even
Always. No,
despite the poverty?
Always said afterwards, whenever he'd complain, he constantly brought it up to her. He was a complainer, and, to some extent, and she would always say, Carl, the only thing we have left is that trip, and they'll never take that away from me.
And she had those memories.
She believed that, yeah, very strongly.
He wasn't convinced, I gather.
Not a goddamn bit. But I grew up with that philosophy. The only thing what we have left is what we did with it. I always tell them, when we give something away, well, if we charity or we do something, I say, well, they can take everything away we got, but they'll never take that trip away from us, or they'll never take that gift away from us. We know we got that done. And my children have grown up with that philosophy. That came from my mother.
Tell me in what ways your mother and your father were different. I gather they were.
Well, my father was a man of not a particularly even disposition. He wasn't a fellow who worked very hard. He wasn't made for the world. He really should have been a musician. He was volatile, emotional, difficult. My mother was quiet, strong, steady, firm, with great vision, I think. I was the first of the two children she had, and she used to always say, Bobby will be a great ambassador. And he will be the first Jewish governor of Texas. Well, I turned down the chance to run for governor several times, including this year, and I think I might have been elected, and I did become an ambassador, if not so great. By my own counts, there are some who would say so. So I think that's what really made me always. She gave me the ability to dream and to set goals and have a theme for my life and for our family's life. And she and I were very, very close. And,
you were closer to her than to your father.
Much closer. Well, my father and I got along well, but he was a difficult man, and but I idolized my mother, and I was unhappily I was wise enough, early enough to see my father's weaknesses and my mother's strengths, And it isn't very nice to see those things. I knew that she was the breadwinner. She ran the store, and Saturday afternoon when they were busy, he would leave and go out and listen to the car radio. I can remember as a kid and hear the New York Philharmonic. I think it was whatever it was. Even then, the beautiful music appealed to him more on Saturday afternoon in the fall. That was the only time the cotton pickers and farmers came in to spend their money. But at 2 o'clock he'd go listen to the radio. Well, that's lovely. But to me, seeing my mother in the store and him sitting out in the car listening to the radio, it was not pleasant.
Do you think it was temperament that shaped each of them, or was it something else?
Oh, I don't know what it was. I'm not. I don't get into those things. What they were, and I don't know what my mother. I think it's just the genes you happen to be born with. That's all I know. You get a break and you're born with strong genes. My mother, all of her 3 sisters were strong, and her brother was strong, and they were very fortunate. My dad was weak, nice man, very popular man. My mother was not particularly popular. She was serious, hardworking, very quiet and reserved. My father was exceedingly popular. Everyone loved him, and he gave me a great deal. He gave me a personality, and my brother a personality. It served us very well, the ability to get along with people and have a smile, and ability to turn a quip, and things that have served me very well in my public career. And
so you did get something from him as well as from her?
Oh, I got a great deal from him, and I loved him, and we were very close. But if I'm doing this thing, I might as well tell the story. You tell it as it is. He was temperamental, rather emotional, not very strong man.
What about your brother? Your mother had great confidence in your future.
Yeah. And also in my brothers. But my brother is a much better businessman than I am. And he's brighter, I think, in many respects than I am. I think his intellectual competence is superior to mine. He's been in the private sector rather than the public sector. And he's 7 years younger than I am. And he's successful. It's interesting, of all those people all those brothers that came to Texas, they scattered out all over the landscape, and I have a lot of cousins in different cities. Still have cousins in Hempstead, in Houston, Fort Worth, but I don't think any of them accumulated very much. But my brother and myself, we became well-to-do by today's standards. The others are all hard-working people, wonderful people. We're a very close family. I see them and talk to them. I talk to 2 or 3 members of my family every night, I guess, at least.
What kind of business did your brother go into?
Well, my brother went into packaging business, so he was successful, and then he's chairman of the board of a number of banks. He's in banking and real estate, and so he's had his career, which has been as successful as mine. It's just been in the private sector.
Did you work in your father's store at all?
Oh, yes. Sure. Every day after school, many days we'd work, and always on Saturdays.
You went to public schools there?
Oh, yeah. There was nothing else to go to.
Tell me about the Jewish life in those little
Had
towns.
none. Zero. We didn't. When I was 12 years old, I went to the Baptist Young People's Union when I was 12, 13, 14.
For what?
Social life, and that's where the girls were, and so that's where I went. There's a story which is not not apocryphal but true, that they elected when they were electing officers at the Baptist Young People Union. When I was about 14 or 13, 14, somebody nominated me for president, and if they hadn't realized that I didn't belong, really, I wasn't a member. If the preacher hadn't reminded them of that. The preacher's name was Sam Morris. I still remember it. I would have probably been elected president of that. Oh man, Sam Morris is still living. He runs a religious radio station in San Antonio, Texas. He must be 80 years old now, 85. And I hear from him occasionally, but I remember him coming in and saying, "You can't elect him." And
So you were not bar mitzvah, for example.
No,
Hmm.
I didn't know what bar mitzvah was until I was 30 years old, I suspected. 20
Hmm.
years old.
But the Jews did come together on occasion.
Oh yes, my parents would close the store on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, no matter how poor they, how difficult it was. They would always, as you know, one of the holidays would always fall on a Saturday.
Almost always.
Very rare, every 10th year I think is otherwise, but I can remember that from my youth. But they would always keep the store closed, and to show they had respect for their religion. But and occasionally we would drive into Fort Worth, where my grandparents then lived, and go to services with them and with my grandmother in later years. And we always went to one of the services with her so we would drive in about 165 miles and go to services and get up the next morning and drive back, or go to the services again that morning and then drive back.
Was that a consistent thing on the holidays?
Always consistent. All the family came together. Her 4 children then had children of their own. She was, I guess, 65 or 70 as I look back, and my parents were 45, and from the time we were 5 till I was out of college, we did it. We always did it as long as my grandmother was there. And,
do you have any memories of those services?
Oh yes.
What kind of services were they?
Well, they were Reform services, and Rabbi, I can still remember his name. I hadn't thought of it in 35 years, but his name was Mel, M-E-H-L.
What was the name of that congregation?
I don't know. I really don't know. I later, interestingly, with all that thing, I served as president of the congregation in Dallas, but it wasn't because of my great background in Judaism. I think it was because I was a fundraiser in there. And the congregations always need money.
Did the family get together on other occasions, like Passover?
Yes, we did on occasions. But we still celebrate. We still very careful, even though I don't go to services very often. Excuse me, let me take it.
So you were saying that while you did not have a Jewish education, you certainly were always aware that you were a Jew because of your family associations and.
We always felt we felt very comfortable as Jews, and there was no question. As a matter of fact, my mother didn't serve. Well, it's strange. We didn't serve bacon or ham, pork in the house, and we never served bread, of course, during Passover days. But we never went to service. She never said a prayer. We didn't light candles on Friday night. We didn't do any of those things. She had no feeling for Judaism in its formal sense herself. She had never been. Neither my mother or father had ever been affiliated, either as children or adults, with any Jewish congregation. They once thought it would be smart to bring a rabbi down from Wichita Falls who would give my brother and I an education, and he was supposed to come in about one day a week and drive down. Wichita Falls was about 95 miles away, and after his first day or two with us, he declined the job. He needed money, but not that bad, I think, and that was the end of our Jewish education. And,
so you resisted it?
Yeah, and it's always been a matter of some. I always felt bummed about it, and that's why I was so anxious my children all be confirmed, and why I was somewhat active in the temple. And we always we had an active role in temple life until the children each made their own decisions about what they want to do with their lives.
I was going to ask you whether you felt at any time during your later life the lack of Jewish education.
Yes, I did. It was always awkward. Helen used to laugh because people would tell jokes involving something out of the Bible or something out of Jewish history, even if it was the simplest things involving Moses that I seemed to know nothing about. And I was never quite sure who was in the bulrushes, so to speak, she used to say. And but she had come from a family that had a little bit different background.
As a Jew, you seem to have mingled quite easily with the non-Jews in the community. Did you ever encounter any anti-Semitism?
Oh, sure, you encounter anti-Semitism. I never paid much attention. We were always secure enough. My mother and father gave us great security. They didn't worry about that very much. We were brought up in a rough sort of environment. And we were called Jew babies and things like that. and you little crash killer, things like that, and you fought your way out of it, or ran. If he's big, you ran and ignored it. If he's little, you tried to whip his ass, sort of thing. And
What did
you
you
picked
find?
your spots, and that's why you learned a lot about life. There's a great story. When we lived in Hamlin, Texas, and there was a great story out there for many, many years. I'm sure there'd be no one living who'd remember it now, but I still remember the name. It's strange. The man, his name was Star Inzer, Inzer, Inzer's Drugs. And my father used to tell this story. He was pushing me in the baby carriage when I was a baby. They just moved from Lockhart, and on the not concrete, but on wooden sidewalks as they had in those little West Texas cowboy towns in those days, and pushed me towards the store, proud of his new year-old son, I guess, or 2-year-old, whatever I was, in the carriage. And some guy said, "That's a pretty little crash killer." 1920. My father jumped at him. He's a little man, but had a horrible temper, and he was all over him, flailing away. And this guy was kicking the hell out of him. Back when the people pulled him apart, just lasted a couple of minutes. And my father said to this man, as he would tell the story, I heard him tell it 1,000 times, and others used to tell me about it. It was a known story out there. "You dirty son of a bitch," he said, "God will punish you for putting hate in the heart of a child." And they pulled Dad away and the other fellow away, and he came on home. That night the fellow dropped dead. Well, my dad used to say, "Those son of a bitches left me alone out in that town then on. They'd never seen a Jew, and they figured, my God, I really had some connection up there." And he used to laugh and say it never occurred to any that probably what caused a heart attack. He had a bad heart, and the excitement of that incident and the fight taxed it, and he dropped dead that night. And but there were just enough of them out there that Dad used to laugh and say, "They left me alone for a long time. Nobody wanted to cross Charlie Strauss."
That's a delicious story.
Isn't that a wonderful story?
Terrific. How did you, as you got a little bit older and started thinking about your future, you were poor, the family was poor, but you went on to college. Was there ever any question but that you would go on to
Oh,
college?
no, there was never any question. I'd go to college, I'd be a lawyer.
Really?
Yeah.
Who made that decision?
My mother. She'd always said, when I was talking about those trips to Fort Worth on these Jewish holidays, the uncles and aunts would all be sitting around having coffee cake or schmoosing about something, as they would call it in those days, in the living room, and I'd come in, and I was about 7 or 8 years old, and they'd say, I had an uncle who spoke with an accent, and he'd say, "Well, here comes the governor," and everyone would laugh, but not my mother. She took it very seriously. And I can still remember laughing at her and at me, or making a joke out of it. But she always told them over and over, and they all know it in my family. My cousins now still remind me of that. They too would be youngsters playing around, and they'd say, "Here comes the governor."
Did she see law as an avenue towards
Yes, and law was
political?
an avenue to be for a political career, and she'd always dreamed for a public career for me.
Mhm. And you accepted that notion as inevitable.
I just assumed that and it appealed to me. I was always good with people, and I was a bit of a leader, never a strong leader. I was a late bloomer, but I did well, not scholastically, but I did well in other things, and I was always holding some title of some kind.
In high school?
Yeah, and in grade school, I was never much of an athlete, and I never was much of a scholar. But I was always a fellow that had some kind of quality that people related to a little bit.
The University of Pittsburgh was the main choice, the only
University
choice?
of Texas.
Texas, I'm sorry.
Yes, you never thought of going anywhere else. I didn't. It was a great state school, and it was cheap. The first place you didn't want to go to the church schools, I wasn't, and my mother was anxious we'd go away and meet some, associate with more Jews. and joined a Jewish fraternity. She was very anxious to do that, and so it was just assumed that I'd go to the University of Texas. It was the cheapest place to go, and we thought it was a good school. My parents weren't interested in Harvard or Yale, even if I'd had the grades to get in there, and they had neither the money nor, frankly, the intellectual interest in that. And
you did join a Jewish fraternity too,
Oh,
did you?
sure.
Which one was it?
Sigma Alpha Mu. I joined it, and again was a poor student in the University of Texas, and
What's poor?
well, I was a very poor student. I was low end of my class. I'd say always in the low 25% of my class.
Why was that?
My mother never thought I ought to waste much time on studies. She used to say, "Don't study too hard; you just get your stomach upset. Main thing to do is learn to live with people and be strong, and don't worry about these grades. Doesn't really make any difference. All you need to do is get enough to get that law degree."
I guess she was right.
And she was right. But for me, might not have been for somebody else. Maybe if she'd have demanded more, we'd have done better. My brother and I later set up a little scholarship in our high school back in Stanford, and the requirement is to go to someone who did not have top grades. And grades cannot be considered. It's on character and leadership and ability to, I forget it. But character had more to do with it, and nothing, grades had nothing to do with it. That came from our mother. We were both poor students. And she thought, she took a dim view of people studying too much. And
But you had a major in something, I suppose.
well, law. And
But as an undergraduate?
yes, an undergraduate. So you just had to go to undergraduate school a couple of years, and I went 3 because of trying to get a little more maturity, get a few more courses. And I'd probably failed 2 or 3 courses and needed the extra year.
But you still got into law school.
Yeah, well, it didn't take much, and I had good enough record to get in law school. They took just about anybody then, and I barely got out of law school again. I never failed anything, but I was the bottom 20% of my class when I left law school.
You had an eminent, later eminent classmate at that time, John Connolly.
Yes,
How did you and he become friends?
we came to the University of Texas. We first became friends.
You were classmates, were you?
He's ahead of me, but we knew each other well, and we were both active in the political life of the school. He was another poor student, and we were both sort of in leadership roles and things as kids on a campus. You know how that works out. And so we.
Were you active in
Oh,
campus
yeah.
politics?
Oh yes, very.
Doing what?
Just whatever you did. I was invited to join the right organizations, and I was one of the 2 or 3 Jews ever taken into an organization they called Cowboys, and just and it was the things kids did. But I had my friendships then spanned most of the Jewish students ran together and lived together and went out together.
What was it, though, besides your common interest in politics, do you think, that made you and John Connolly friends? You seem like disparate kinds of people.
Well, at the time we were not.
Ah.
At the time we were both were poor. We both came from small towns. We both had friends who were rich from the cities. We both were rather reasonably attractive physically and intellectually. We got along well with people. We were both very popular. He was not in the fraternity group. I was, and we were each leaders in our own group. He was ahead of me. He became president of the student body.
Did you manage his campaign?
No, we were on the other side. He defeated the fellow whose campaign I managed, and Connolly. Then you must remember, we were both all out for Roosevelt, all out for Lyndon Johnson. Connolly and I were. He worked for the National Youth Administration, which was a Roosevelt thing. I worked at the state capitol for a legislator, and we were involved in the political area. We were both trying to eke our way through college, and each getting a little help from home, and each making a little money on our own.
Did you consider yourself a liberal at that time?
Oh, the first political campaign I ever really worked in was Lyndon Johnson's for Congress. I didn't do anything but hand out a few circulars then, but I remember driving over to Lockhart, where I'd come from, and passing out circulars for Lyndon Johnson.
You were 19 at the time, as I recall.
Yeah, about that. And Connolly then went on to work for Johnson. He was a couple of years ahead of me. when Johnson finally got into Congress, he went up there a few years later and worked for him. And then afterwards, in the Johnson campaigns for the Senate, John and I were thrown back together. We were separated for a few years, and then we worked together politically. I always under him. He was very close to Johnson. He had been his worked with him, and I worked with John. Then when Connie became secretary, and then we worked together and try to nominate Johnson. I'm skipping around a bit, but just give
Yeah.
you a feel of this thing.
Yes,
You'd probably rather be more orderly.
Well, we certainly want to get back
Yeah.
to that. I did want to pick up after law school, though, when it was 1941, and I guess you were close to getting into war.
Yeah.
You went with the FBI.
Yeah.
How did that decision come about?
Well, FBI was interviewing, and everybody wanted to get in there.
Why?
And well, first place, we were not in war, and they were drafting people like crazy. And this job paid $265 a month, and kept you out of the draft. And it was a hero's job. It was glamorous. And in those days, the FBI was, you dreamed of, everyone was going to kill John Dillinger, and everyone was going to catch a spy. And when they came down on the Texas campus, all the law students applied, or most of them did, I'd say 3/4. And they picked just 2. And again, I was one of them, strangely enough. And again, without that record, but I think I did well, and obviously did well in the interviews, what made the difference. And I convinced a fellow named Akers, Maurice Akers, I can still remember his name, that I should I'd make a good agent. And so I was invited to join the FBI. Helen and I was very anxious to marry my wife, and that money made it possible.
How did you, I want to diverge just a moment from your career pursuits to ask you about how you met your wife. You did marry her just about that
I
time.
met her at the University of Texas, and casual, as kids meet. We were out at the same place. She had a date with one fellow, and I had a date with another girl, and you got together and liked each other, and we always went together. We've been together forever.
Mm-hmm.
We haven't been away from each other very much since, I guess, 1937 when we met.
She was encouraging of your joining the FBI then?
She didn't encourage me in anything I wanted to do, and always has been.
There could not have been many Jewish FBI agents.
I think there were just a handful.
Did you meet some others? Were there some others?
Yeah, there's a fellow named Sidney Wolf I knew. There's one other fellow, and this fellow named Rosen, who had a big job in it, and he's now probably, you know, Rosen, the baseball player. He used to be a baseball player, and then now he's in the front office of one of the teams. Al Rosen.
Al Rosen.
But Al Rosen, a guy named Sidney Wolf, and a couple other fellows and me, out of about 3,000 agents.
You did a good bit of traveling around as an agent.
Yeah.
Des Moines, I think you were in.
Yeah, I was
some other
stationed in
cities.
Des Moines, and spent my first wedding anniversary living in Council Bluffs, Iowa. And we lived in Cincinnati a short while, and then moved to Columbus, and moved from there back to Texas.
You were in the FBI a total of what?
I'd say 4 years.
Did the traveling around stand you in good stead?
Everything stands me in good stead. My life's been a great life, and I shouldn't learn it all. I've learned everything I've done. I've gained more than I've put into it. I think I've enriched myself with every experience.
I guess that was really, as I think about it, the first exposure to the rest of the country that you
It
must have
was.
had, although you'd been to Europe.
It was really my first exposure. Matter of fact, I got a lot more out of the FBI than I put into it, and it's there I matured. Until I finished the FBI, I really was a late bloomer. I've described myself, and I really was. But when I got out of the FBI, I had learned a lot, and I hit the ground running.
What kinds of things did you learn?
I don't know. I just matured. It's almost as if they pulled the curtain back, and I really understood what kind of set, what the play was all about, instead of just being a foggy bunch of voices. Finally, all the clouds lifted away, and hell, I began to understand this thing, and it was this world, and I knew it was a world in which I could compete. And I think having competed for 4 years in the FBI with a very select group of people, and managed to hang on, again, not starring, but doing reasonably well.
Did you have some exciting or significant cases?
Oh, my imagination now leads me to believe, if you'd hear me tell them now, they're very exciting. But at the time, I think they were pretty mundane. Some of them were rather interesting, but the main thing was I matured. I used to say I matured at a time on the government's payroll, and not in the Army. 2 or 3 times I thought I should quit the FBI, but Hoover had you frozen then, where you couldn't get in the service. Not because I wanted to be brave, but because I thought I ought to be doing it maybe and risking my life rather than being in a more secure job.
Why did you have that feeling?
I don't know. I guess in those days there was a lot of patriotism around, and many of us in the FBI used to think that even though we were told we were doing more there than we could do anywhere else, we're more valuable. It wasn't enough to satisfy us. I guess we needed a uniform because the flags played, and we were ashamed of not having one.
But you were tracking down Nazi agents?
Well,
or?
yes, I say it was a role, but there was an awful lot of other paperwork stuff to it. You didn't realize the Army was like that too. You'd have been plunking away on a typewriter in the Army. So, but we were kids, and Helen and I were kids, and Helen and I used to talk about it a great deal. And again, she'd say, "Whatever you want to do."
The notion, the public concept of the FBI at that time was quite different
Very high,
from what it was later.
Then you're a hero. When we came out of the FBI, I used to make speeches around Dallas. Everybody wanted you to speak because you were a hero. It was like an astronaut in town, telling stories of the FBI and the Kiwanis and the Rotary Club or the PTA. And as a young lawyer, I was anxious to establish myself, and so I made speeches. And a number of other FBI agents were back in Dallas then. The war was over, and we all were making speeches. And we used to drink coffee in the morning, and we'd tell about the stories we told the night before the speech.
Were they real life
And we
stories?
were all lying, of course, exaggerating. And I'd tell a story that I'd hear from another fellow. You kind of put yourself in it a little bit, and they'd put you in their stories. Years later, we used to sit around laughing. We really couldn't tell. Couldn't remember what we'd actually done or what we'd exaggerated. And the truth, it was the fiction merged into the truth, and it all became true.
All right, now this is where it stops. Did you have any really significant case in the FBI?
Oh, I guess yes. I think we had significant cases, but they weren't the kind of things that mean anything now. But you were in exciting things. Sometimes you'd be on a stakeout for somebody. It was exciting. Or kidnap case worked on exciting. I remember reading the first time I opened a file and saw and realized there was an atomic project going forward, and it was a highly secret. Of course, no one knew. That was for 2 years before the bomb went off. I'd been, when I was in Columbus, I remember being assigned to trail a man across the country who was suspected of being a espionage agent, and follow him as he dealt everybody he dealt with. Then we checked him out, building the kind of route, all the routes of every place he touched. Several cases, things like that. But so they were exciting things.
Indeed,
Yeah.
yes. And the fact that you
Worried to death you're going to lose them, and what Hoover would do if you. We were also scared of Hoover. What the director would do if you were to lose them. I always used to say that Hoover was a fellow who, in those days, he was a much better man, I think, than he was his last few years when he became arrogant and difficult and impossible almost. But he was a tough man even in those days, but he was able. I used to say to Helen that it was a system devised by a genius to be carried out by a bunch of fools like me, and the system worked.
Did you ever meet Hoover?
Oh, yeah, well.
How did he come across to you?
It scared me to death. I'd break out in cold sweat.
And in later life, when
I
you
met him then later and got to know him socially, and realized there was nothing to be very scared of. That he was an insecure little man himself.
Interesting. Well, you used that FBI experience to some extent to make yourself known and get your law practice started. Tell me about starting up a law firm. That must have been a terrific challenge.
Well, it was. I didn't really have a lot of alternatives. Dick Gump and I have been looking for a job, and neither one of us much wanted to go to work for an old firm.
Who was Dick Gump?
Dick Gump, he was my partner that I formed the firm with.
How would you know him?
He and I had gone to law school together, pre-law, and we're in the FBI together. Not in the same places, but we'd always been friends and still are very close. So I ran into him on the street one day, and I said, Gump, I'm thinking about forming my own law office. I'd find somebody had enough guts to try it with me. And he said he did, and he had about $8,000 in stocks that he inherited from his parents. And my father-in-law agreed to guarantee a note from me for $10,000. So we had between us enough to live. It didn't cost about $400 a month to live in those days. And so I had a few thousand of my own we'd saved in the FBI. So we figured we had enough to last a couple of years with what little we'd make to supplement our income. By then we'd be making a living. And we were just about right. We started making a living just about the time our money was beginning to run out.
What kinds of cases did you handle at first?
Divorces, guy in jail for hot checking, prostitute, somebody, anything that they paid $10 or more. And then we occasionally get a business matter. I'd met people in town, and I was getting business matters. And when I got a chance to do work for the average businessman, a little work, well, I would do it better and usually cheaper. We worked hard, Gump and I did, and we were good. And our client practice began to grow, and people began to think of us as two young men who are hardworking, energetic, and you got your money's worth.
Did you build up the firm much at that point?
Well, I said grew it. I've been practicing law on my own since 19